Hi, this is Paul. Algo's been feeding this to me for a day or so, and then someone messaged me and said, "Oh, this was a really interesting conversation." In some ways, this conversation sort of harkens back to Jordan Peterson 2017 in terms of the kind of conversation it was, but there's clearly obviously some elements in it. Peterson Academy talked about quite a bit. It was an interesting discussion too on pricing, but I had no idea. I'd never seen this channel before, an iced coffee house channel, so I don't know anything about the channel or the guys that did it. Comparing to the paid promotional advertising within the video, they don't usually dress as well as they did for Dr. Peterson. This is I don't know exactly where he's at, but he did his conversation with Jonathan Peugeot and Douglas Murray. He's done other conversations on this set in this space, wherever this is. I don't know where this is. He started out kind of interesting in the conversation. He seemed a little less excited than he often is at the beginning of a conversation. But one of the things that I liked about this was here he's doing more conversations with people sort of outside the bubble. And now outside his bubble, let's say the intellectual dark web bubble, outside Rogan, outside Daily Wire, outside Arc, outside a lot of these other places, and he's doing them with other podcasts. And it could just be that his tour's ended now, so he's got a little bit more free time to do this kind of thing. But I think it's good that he's getting out. Now, these guys obviously were a welcoming, a friendly audience for him, and they're two young men, and so they very much are sort of the demographic that he wants to connect with. But overall, so the earlier part of the conversation really did harken back to the early sort of wave one of the Jordan Peterson wave, of the Jordan Peterson phenomena, where he's mostly talking psychology and his basically his personality metrics and IQ. And it was really good to hear him talking about those things again, because again, I mean, this is what he's an expert in many ways. Now and so it's to me again, it's really good to hear him working on these things and speaking about psychology. I'm not going to go through the whole conversation. For me, the most interesting part of the conversation, though, of course, was when they get talking about religion. Now, another thing, the later in the conversation talk about Peterson Academy, but he says in his course on the Sermon on the Mount. Now, is that going to be on the Peterson Academy? Am I gonna? Some of the paywall stuff, I don't know. Is there? So let me know below if you've looked at this, because I'm sure some of you have looked into Peterson Academy. I'm sure some of you have already enrolled. But is there like an audit level of this? Because I'm super interested in the lectures. At least I'm interested in a smattering of the lectures or some of the lectures. But I don't need another degree. Okay, I don't really need another degree. But I'm interested in the lectures. And part of what was fun. Well, let me go back to Christian Baxter did an outstanding conversation with Sam. I thought this was tremendous, and there are a whole bunch of things I'd love to weigh in on it, and I just don't have enough time. I'm really trying to figure out how to structure my life so I can weigh in on these things, because the way I currently do it now, I'm sort of set up in my office, and I need a little bit of time to sort of do this. I've always sort of worked my office and my studio as a way that I can just sort of, I used to be back in that corner. I had a little laptop there. I could just get in a chair. I could turn on the camera. I could turn on the light. I could quick make a video and then be done. I rearranged my office, so now I actually have an elevating desk, so I can sort of move from study mode where I can see my monitors and do my work to sort of studio mode. I can get up and I can do this. But I really need a way that I can make a lot more content, which is crazy because I already make way too much content for the good of my channel. But one of the things I loved about this video was Sam basically articulated exactly why I started this channel, which was I wanted to learn. And in many ways, I know there's all this the mana conversation in the TLC. The mana conversation in the TLC is, what is it? Well, in a lot of ways, TLC is a learning community, and Sam started his YouTube channel to learn. I started my YouTube channel to learn, and we're all just sort of starting these channels to learn together. So Christian does a great conversation with Sam, and Sam says this answers this question.
What I have like seen of it, how you did get connected to this space. What is that story?
Sure. It was through Jordan Peterson. How did I find Jordan Peterson? I've been like a large consumer of YouTube for a long time, probably over a decade at this point. And I loved sort of intellectual, philosophical, or religious content. And I would listen to, back like over 10 years ago, the quality and character of content on YouTube was a little different than it is now. There weren't quite nearly as many, producers of content and various kind of spaces like we have now. It was like, oh, some random professors post their lectures and lots of cat videos, and it felt like totally different in character than it does now. And I remember I was on a Kierkegaard stint. I know you've mentioned Kierkegaard favorably a couple times, and so I know that you like him, or at least wait a minute, it was one of your recent interviews. Someone was saying that they were going to send you a book. Were you talking?
That was Ken Lowry.
Ken Lowry, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he said that he needed to get you on a higher dose of Kierkegaard, and I feel like that Kierkegaard is a good thing. People, I think, feel like go through Kierkegaard phases. Some people stay there, but anyway. So I remember sometimes saying like, I don't know, 2014. And also, as you mentioned, I've been sort of a data scientist or a statistician for a while. And oftentimes that means that I'm on my computer at my desk alone doing some kind of routine data cleaning that only uses half your mind for a couple hours. And so I have another half of my mind that could be listening to a YouTube video. And so I think I searched Kierkegaard philosophy lecture or something like that in the YouTube search bar. And up pops this random Canadian professor named Jordan Peterson, who has a lecture, and it's like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. I'm like, well, I wasn't looking for the Nietzsche, but I've already watched the other top 3 hits on this search, so I guess I'll watch this one now. And well, he's a psychology professor. I was looking for philosophy, but wherever, I'll take what I can get. And I remember listening to it and being like, that was one of the best college lectures I've ever heard. I'd already been through undergrad and grad school at some pretty respectable colleges at this point. And I was like, this guy's amazing. And I'm like, oh, okay, that lecture was part of one of his courses. All right, which course was it? Okay, I'll start at the first lecture of that course and listen to the whole course.
Wow. And what year was this?
2014 or something like that. Yeah. But like, this is back when those videos might have only had thousands or tens of thousands of views.
And I've heard a lot of stories like this from people, especially in my local Jordan Peterson meetup. And one of the guys connected to the local Jordan Peterson meetup back when I started that he said he was just listening to all of these college professor videos on YouTube. And I'm pretty sure that individual does not have a college degree. Now, he's a very, very smart guy, but he doesn't have a college degree. And like Sam, he works in IT. And so for him, it was like, I'm going to listen to this stuff. And there's a lot of us out there. And, well, so I also caught this little video, how YouTube beat Netflix and Disney in the streaming wars. And sort of contra Peterson in the video when he talks about, and Peterson said this often over the years, free is not a good price. Free has its advantages, and I generally agree with the other rationale against free. But what this piece basically says is, yeah, but for getting people in the door, free is pretty good. Now, there's another video that I watched over the weekend, which was basically someone talking about the fact that with a lot of these, let's say the value arc of a lot of startups they burn through venture capital, they get everybody hooked, and once they have you hooked, and then it just gets crappier and crappier. What you pay for Amazon is getting it more. What you pay for Uber is more. Uber Eats is a ridiculously bad value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's some of that to free too, because YouTube gets you in because it's free, but then the ads are annoying, and then they get you to pay YouTube Premium. But for the most part, I'm comfortable with my YouTube Premium family plan because I don't want to watch videos, and well, at some point, I guess I'll probably have to take my kids off the dole and make them buy their own YouTube Premium if they want to. But I haven't done that to my kids yet. I started this when streaming things was just early, and I didn't want my internet. This was way back with Napster and all kinds of piracy stuff. I didn't want my internet connection getting flagged because my kids were pirating stuff. So I said, it used to be Google Music and YouTube Premium was bundled, and then of course Google Music went away and it's just YouTube Music and YouTube Premium. So here's all your music stuff, here's all your YouTube stuff, no ads, except those stupid things in the middle of the video which always annoy me. But anyway, so free has its power, and I think one of the huge things is that there is a market for people like me and Sam and many in the TLC that we're just lifelong learners, and yeah. So we'll see if Peterson Academy figures out how to handle us, because I think I would certainly pay for it. I'd pay for Daily Wire Plus, and I only keep Daily Wire Plus because of Jordan Peterson stuff. And in fact, I'm looking at this new Foundations of Western Civilization thing that he has on. And then once I get a sense of it, I'll probably talk about it a little bit. But of course, if it's behind the Daily Plus paywall, I don't share any clips, but I'll talk about it and give a little review of it, because I think that's helpful and that's fair, and it doesn't violate the paywall or copyright or anything like that. But yeah, there's a lot of us out there that just are always we're lifelong learners. And so YouTube and universities like Yale and Jordan Peterson and just a whole bunch of others who have put their lectures out there, even if the quality has been, the production quality has been crap, has been really good. Anyway, back to the conversation I was supposed to be commenting on. Okay, here's the area or the segment. And Peterson is talking about aiming up. He's talking about the value of marriage. He's talking about the value of parenthood. And they asked him some good questions, and I liked where this conversation went.
There's all sorts
but
of
just something to contend
that,
with that will always keep you in check is essentially what you're saying.
Well, and something to care for over the long run that isn't you.
Couldn't that also be, let's say, a sibling or a close friend?
Sure.
But it's just not as
we have these other
optimal
relationships, but there isn't the advantage to long-term heterosexual child-centered coupling is that it provides all those other benefits. There's a polarity between men and women that's important, a fundamental orientation that's important. If you can bring both of those viewpoints to any given situation, in all likelihood, that's more advantageous. That provides a platform for children and grandchildren, so the continuity of humanity across the generations. And the core of that's obviously the relationship between men and women. Are there ways of approximating that? Well, obviously, but they're approximations. And that doesn't mean, obviously, there are some people who have better friendships than their marriage, but that's irrelevant with regards to the main point, because we're talking about something that's an ideal.
And also, better in what way? Different friendships and marriages work on you in different ways, and they achieve different things. I really liked how he fleshed this out. I was thinking the other day, so today was the first day of school for my wife's school, and so last week, and again, I said she couldn't get into her classroom very early because the school district is redoing the school and putting in new carpet, painting, putting in new furniture, all that stuff. And because they're also starting school early, it happened to happen early, so last week, my wife was in a big rush to do stuff, and so in past years, our kids were living where, and I was busy working, so the kids would come and help her move furniture. Well, right now, at this moment, don't have any of the other kids in our house, so it's all right. I go, and I just thought, yeah, this male-female thing, it's all of the differences. I've been thinking about the fact that in our was talking about this at the estuary group, that I remember when Peterson talked about the fact that the more equal societies get, the more the male-female differentiation expresses itself in the culture. And I thought, there's all kinds of videos right now on YouTube that are saying, wow, in very interesting ways, men, especially young men, are voting for Trump and women are voting for Harris. And I thought, wow, I think this particular season right now has really accentuated these two groups' work going apart from each other. And again, unlike, let's say, in a European nation where you in many ways sort of have an ethno-nation, the United States is a credo nation. There's ostensibly no ethnic group that has a majority in the nation. And what that means is that there's incredible diversity. And of course, if you have incredible ethnic diversity and incredible cultural diversity in the system, the one aspect where you won't have that kind of diversity, in other words, the diversity washes out, and then you have male-female issues sort of coming to the fore, and in many ways, perhaps this election is all about that. And so what a benefit it is to have a marriage between a man and a woman, because again, you've got the complement of the opposites in a unit. And earlier in this video, we talked nicely about the fact that, well, part of what happens in a marriage is hopefully you're sort of one unit, and so then the closer and tighter you're getting, the longer you are together, the more advantages you can accrue, but also, of course, the more work you have to do to actually achieve those advantages.
No, everybody falls short of the ideal. But part of the reason you can't maintain sanity isn't in your head. Like, here's a definition of sanity. You're well enough socialized so other people can tell you when you're an idiot and you'll listen. So why is that a good solution? Well, there's a lot of other people. And if they're giving you signals all the time, all you have to do is listen. So that's a good deal for you. Now, you might think, well, that's, sanity's in my head. It's like, what makes you think?
And it's been interesting because we've been watching Peterson for a long time, and it's fun when different themes emerge, because this theme emerged about a year and a half ago, and I can always tell when a new theme emerges because I usually point it out in the videos. And what's fun is when the new theme sort of emerges and then gets integrated into the package, and the sanity's not in your head has been sort of nicely integrated into the package now.
Think you can regulate yourself. You're pretty goddamn complicated, So we regulate ourselves socially. That's why we talk to each other. It's vital.
That's so interesting. I feel like, once again, what you're saying, I feel like I'm like struck with my pride a little bit. Like, I feel like I can regulate myself. I can always aim up or try to do what is right and think, well, I guess I'm still basing my decision making, because a heuristic I use a lot of the time when I'm trying to decide.
Okay, before he gets to his heuristic, which isn't a bad heuristic, but it's a very common heuristic. But again, I think part of what the aids of new atheism did in the culture was it sort of became sort of a secular acid wash in the culture. And so people sort of blindly, mindlessly say, well, I aim up, as if up is self-evident as Sam Harris likes to make it think. And of course, the whole Tom Holland thesis, and anybody who's paid any attention to the vast diversity of programs, cultural programs that human beings seem to be able to run, your up is culturally sourced. Your up you have inherited from this cultural map that has been brought through time and was imprinted on you on your first draft. Now it's so close to you, and if you have enough commonality around you, it's up is just self-evident. Tom Holland, of course, comes around and says it's not self-evident at all. Any historian will say, what people value, people's value hierarchies continue to change over time. Now they're tweaked, and of course there's sort of massive assumptions and fine little recalibrations, and all of which matter. But he just says, I aim up, as if up is self-evident. It's like, up is in no way self-evident.
what to do between like a moral conundrum is like, what would the optimal person in this situation do? And completely remove myself from this situation. And then I do that. But I guess that's also relating.
Well, that's right.
Yeah,
That's
being
what you've
impressed
done.
upon
Well,
by
that's
the-
right. What you've done to some, that's a good observation. What you've done to some degree is you've constructed an idealized representation of another.
You've received a construction that you've probably tweaked and worked through, and you might have made some choices along the way in terms of recalibrating and thinking about it, but you've received, achieved, constructed all of those things together in your mind at this point as a, early 20-something young man, because that will probably continue to change and mature as you get older. And of course, having a child will put that maturity on steroids. So,
or a human being for that matter. That's like the Son of Man in the Christian conception. That's a good way of thinking about it. So what you're doing when you do that is no different from what, say, evangelical Christians do when they ask themselves, what would Jesus do? It's exactly the same thing.
And it's pulled from real people. It's just certain components about them.
Yeah,
so they're
the
still
ideal
technically
parts.
impressing upon me.
Yeah. You're essentially fabricating out of whole cloth something approximating a classic religious orientation.
not really out of whole cloth. You're fabricating out of all of the cloth around you that somehow you have picked up, usually below the waterline, that has been valued, and you're saying, yeah, this is what an ideal person is. This is what they look like.
What would someone who is ideal do in this situation? Well, see, if you delved into that, this is where the religious investigation would take place. It's like, okay, who is this ideal that you're calling upon? What's the characterization of that ideal? You could write that all down. You'd see what your ideal is. And then you'd see that it approximates the figure of the hero in mythology.
Now, and this, of course, is what Ayaan Hirsi Ali did and came up with Jesus. And someone might say, of course you came up with Jesus. You moved to the West. Of course, Jesus was there in the Islamic world to one degree or another as a prophet. You moved to the West, were deeply impressed by the system in the West and the values that have sort of percolated up through centuries and gotten instantiated in the West and are sort of crowdsourced among us in our implicit collective knowledge. And you worked and worked and worked and said, okay, you've got nihilism-induced depression because of course sanity is not between your head. Drinking isn't going to resolve your sanity. They had a nice section on alcohol in this video. Make up your own religion. And that's sort of what the guy does. And she's like, well, Jesus. But then the benefit of Jesus is you don't have to do it by yourself. And then that benefit really sort of gets placed in terms of all of the people around you and all of the churches around you.
Insofar as it has any utility to you.
I told my friend this, and he said that is the start of religion, or that is God to people, which...
Yeah, well, that's the intermediary figure in some ways. So there's the transcendent ultimate unity, let's say, but that's ineffable. It's difficult to establish a relationship with. There's some intermediary figure. That's the role that Christ plays in Christianity, right? That's God brought down to earth. Why is Christ an ideal? Because he welcomes the catastrophe of fate. Right. And so there's no ideal person who doesn't do that. I mean, James Bond does that. Like, well, seriously, like anybody that attracts your admiration is going to have that welcoming attitude towards even the difficulties of existence. Like that's going to be a stellar part of their character. Otherwise, you wouldn't admire them. You admire people who can maintain themselves across a catastrophe. Right. So the most admirable person is the person who can maintain themselves the best across the worst possible catastrophe. Right. And so that'll be lurking at the back of the ideal.
So welcoming suffering.
Okay. Now, there's some really nice sections in Sam and Christian's video about Sam's mission to make Unitarianism tolerable in churches. I was going to say again, but you're going to have to go before Nicaea. And I had a lot of thoughts about this. and the thoughts aren't to sort of get Sam in a pitched battle on figuring out Unitarianism or Trinitarianism by facts and logic. Sam's conversation with Tim Mackey was absolutely stupendous. What a wonderful conversation. Tim Mackey deserves to be on YouTube. Just a wonderful conversation. I was super happy that this thing came about, and I thought it was just an absolutely tremendous conversation. And so Sam and Christian get into this, and of course Sam, well, okay, so we're no longer burning Calvinists are no longer burning Unitarians at the stake. That's a good thing. All right, that's a good thing. Now, of course, for Sam, he talks a lot in this video about the difficulties where, in fact, he'd really love to sort of participate in evangelical churches. They have an incredible conversation about the main line, which was super cool, and I thought super insightful. And then, Sam would really like to have a local church nearby that would have all of the kinds of stuff. I mean, sort of approaching it as, in some ways, a religious consumer. He'd like a, women's programming that his wife would be happy with. He'd like children's programming that he and his wife would be happy with. He doesn't want to have to drive an hour to church. He wants to have good preaching, and now he kind of appreciated the hymns and the organ and the choir over at the main line, but there are a lot of other aspects of the main line that just didn't work for him. Now, there are a lot of Trinitarians or people who really might not have any Trinitarianism or Unitarianism on their brain that are always working through sort of the church shopper's dilemma. But this is where it gets into the fact that, okay, so let's say you want to, I'm going to try to, what would the ideal person do? Okay, well, are you actually going to shape? Are you going to take some ownership over that ideal person that you're trying to emulate? What does that mean? How do you do that project? Because ideally, you need something more than just what my gut says. And I'm not saying you should not listen to your gut, but I think my volume's a little low. I've turned down the fans. My volume's up a little higher. I probably just annoyed a whole bunch of you because you have to readjust your own volume. I turned off a bunch of the fans to make this, and it's only 86 degrees out today, so not too bad. Hence, not enough fan noise. But, okay, so you've got your ideal. Well, ideally, you want to continue to recalibrate that ideal. And a la everything Peterson said in terms of, well, you've got your wife, and you've got your friends, and you've got your family, and you've got your community. And, of course, you want scholars involved in this. And, of course, you want not just scholars involved in this today. It'd be nice if your religion had a history of people who were thinking deeply about this themselves in community all through time in various different cultures and contexts. Of course, you want cultures that are sort of within the same cultural threads as your culture, but also enough variation within those threads so you can actually get a better and better map of reality, because, of course, all of our cultural positions impact how we see our cultural realities. And yeah, you want that ideal to work for you. And that reminded me of this section of my conversation with John Vervaeke about IFS, because IFS sort of takes that project that is usually looking out, family systems and then communities, and turns it in and says, okay, well, but what about the little avatars of all those little communities out there that are in me? And I keep talking about my Consciousness Congress, and I keep talking about the fact that, so there's a little avatar of John Vervaeke that's in me. And it's a greatly reduced Vervaeke down to a distillate of some of what I can conscious remember and a whole lot of other what is as unconscious sort of mapped in me. And there's a little avatar of Sam, and there's a little avatar of Christian, there's a little avatar of Jordan, and there's even avatars of those two dudes he was talking to, but they're super, super thin, and they'll probably sort of got forgotten and thrown away at some point unless they come up again. It's like, oh yeah, I remember you. So they just sort of become kind of a hash, kind of a little code in the brain to hold them there. But when it comes to the one we want to follow, the one we want to emulate. Well, this is a big deal. And at this point, John and I are talking about Jesus, and he talks about Socrates because, of course, after Socrates, for John, Socrates is a big deal. And in many ways, John has sort of chosen Socrates as the one that he wishes to follow. But that then raises the question of, let's say, the Socrates, the historical Socrates, and let's say the mythological Socrates or the academic Socrates or the Socrates of his own understanding, and then the little avatar of Socrates within him, and on and on and on. And again, when we get to the Northwestuary Conference we're going to have this Friday, the live stream this Friday is going to be the participants of that conference here. We're going to, part of what I'm going to start talking about is some of my more recent thinking. Now that I'm doing estuary every week, which is different from church, estuary is so much richer in terms of hearing from the others who participate in it, as opposed to what I usually have done on Sundays, which is either doing a Sunday school class where you hear a little bit more, and then preaching, which is sort of very much one-directional. But all of the knowledge that is implicit in communities, especially in-person communities, my wife had to do some, they're interviewing people at her school, and she was just talking to me about how, unlike me, where I so often talk to people on Zoom and I don't meet them ever or almost never meet them, if you're interviewing for work and you're doing a bunch of interviews on Zoom, 5 or 6 people, and then you hire a person or two that you've interviewed, you really get to know that, oh, these are my first impressions on Zoom. But now that I have met you in person, you're taller, you're shorter, your voice sounds different, you wear these kind of clothes, and of course, day after day after day in community, that picture, that little avatar that I have in me of you just gets richer and fuller and therefore more impactful. So,
when I was doing After Socrates, I made an argument at the very beginning that I was relieved to give up the quest of trying to separate the philosophical Socrates from the historical Socrates. And that the attempt to do that, as far as I can tell, is a catastrophic failure. I'm not saying that, I'm not a mythicist. I don't think Socrates is a myth, even in the good sense of the word. I think there's a historical figure, and we can ask historical questions about Socrates, and we should. But I don't think we can pry those free from the philosophical. And Plato says this in the 7th letter. He said, I've given you a Socrates who's younger and more beautiful. It's just like, oh, and Plato's telling you this clearly, right?
And so you can see that. Now, of course, in Christianity, the Jesus we get from his disciples, we get from his apostles, and we get from those who were the disciples of the apostles. But then what's beautiful about there being a church is that even though there's conflict, sort of your easy, facile assumptions, oh, Jesus to me has red hair, or Jesus to me would never say this, or Jesus would do that. And so many of the conflicts in church history are all over what Jesus is. And, as I was thinking to Sam's talk with Christian, and Sam kind of wanting to open up the door, let's say, undo Nicaea, and I part of the reason I think that it doesn't work and it won't work and it probably will never happen. Not again that we're going to start burning Unitarians, because I'll say, no, you can't burn my Sam. Sam, I love Sam. Sam is super important. Sam is super smart. Sam really helps me in my Christian walk, even just challenging the simplistic, thin avatar that I have in my heart. Sam just keeps coming at me with church history and challenges. And so, in fact, that opponent processing between me and Sam is super helpful for me. And so, part of me would celebrate if Sam would finally say, oh, yeah, okay, I'm a Trinitarian now. But another part of me would probably be a little disappointed, because the Unitarian Sam helps me continue to refine my Trinitarianness. And part of what's going on here is that we're we're always the bigger a community, the bigger tradition, the more that's around it. You might say, well, there just can be more noise to signal with respect to Jesus. And of course, the Enlightenment Project is the hope that if you somehow can arrive at a quote unquote historical Jesus, then yada, 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 yada. And whereas there might be some value in terms of an academic exercise asking Enlightenment-based historical questions with respect to Jesus or Socrates or whatever avatar has sort of risen to the top of your value hierarchy, consciously or unconsciously, it's super helpful to have an enormous community working on that idealized avatar you are going to mold yourself after. And so Jordan Peterson was exactly right. It's what evangelicals say, what would Jesus do? It's right there, right there. So, yeah, definitely catch the whole conversation. 2 hours and 12 minutes was great. It was a great conversation. Really happy to see it. And again, really happy to see sides of Jordan that others can expose. You know, he talked in this video about, they asked him some uncomfortable questions, which were really fun. You know, what is your biggest insecurity? And he talked about sort of the ego thing. And then, you know, what is your biggest weakness? He says, I talk too much. You know, I've not realized the ideal in my podcast. But again, last couple of podcasts that leave eyes, at least I've listened to, I thought, wow, he's getting better. Well, why is he getting better? Well, like he said, he's listening to critics. Now, Tim Keller used to say often, it takes an enormous amount of strength to listen to your critics because, you know, we've all got these, I've got all these avatars of everybody else out there, but I've got my avatar of me too. You know, there's myself and there's my ego, and it's not an evil thing, and it's not my enemy, and it can be a little, you know, everybody's got their insecurities and their weaknesses, and to be exposed. Anyway, so some great videos there, and some great things to sort of put together and ponder. So yeah, let me know what you think, because again, just like Sam said, Christian said, well, why did you start a YouTube channel? Sam said, because I want to learn. I mean, Karen Wong, same thing. And the fact that I think to whatever degree I had said that, I also talk too much, and I have said plenty. I noticed I almost left a trolly comment. There's somebody left a comment here. Paul Vanderklay really does have the ability to talk for hours without ever actually saying anything. My little inner troll had some good comebacks. I'll let it be. That's fine, because as the book of Proverbs says, you know, in many ways, if you can stomach it, your critics are a blessing. You can learn. And part of the problem is I already know this about myself. And I thought a lot about this conversation with Chris Green. This is, sometimes people wonder, why do I make the videos that I make? How do I pick my topic? Sometimes I pick my topic because I've got an hour and I can make a video, and I've been, case in point today, I've been listening to this video this morning, so it's fresh on my mind. I'll make a video about it. But most of the things I make videos about are things that these little avatars sort of get haunted by. And when Chris Green, I mean, it is it is so painful watching me. It is so painful watching me on video. It really is. It is, because I spit it out. Spit it out, damn it. The problem is I'm thinking, and if I were a better person, I'd probably stay here with my mouth shut. while I do all that thinking, and then come out with a nicely packaged little bit of something that you could say, oh, this thing that Chris Green sort of came up with as sort of the climax of the conversation, which was, we really value in our culture people who can sort of reduce all of the complexity down to really little wisdom nuggets. And that's a huge thing. There's real reasons why we should value that. But as Chris says, Chris sort of exposes the opposite of that. And again, in this video with Peterson, he really nicely, as you know, this is part of the thing that has always annoyed me when people sort of like, oh, Jordan Peterson's a hack. It's like, the guy's no hack. He's not a hack at all. Is he perfect? No. Does he sometimes do things that I think he shouldn't do? Sure. But he's no hack. He's a really smart guy, and he knows a lot about a lot of things. And so, yeah, you can benefit listening to him. And here, again, he's so often portrayed as this ideologue, and sometimes with his hyperbole, and I was actually thinking quite a bit about his hyperbole and the relative value and disadvantages of the use of hyperbole in public. Jesus used hyperbole a lot. But at the same time, Jordan Peterson, and it's on display thoroughly in this video, on one hand and the other hand, on the one hand, on the other hand, on the one hand, on the other. All of that nuance back and forth and back and forth. He did so much of that in the early days, and then as conflict just got so intense, he tended to get more shrill, and it's just really fun to see him back in this mode. But of course, again, on the one hand and the other hand, there's something to hyperbole. There's something to shrill. It got Donald Trump the White House once, and maybe a second time. We'll see. But there's a power to that. And so you shouldn't just dismiss the shrill. And then people, of course, shrilly dismiss the shrill. And it just makes me giggle. It makes me giggle when I watch. And I do it sometimes too. But I got to take a snapshot of this for the thumbnail. So that continual reduction and condensation, I think, gives a false sense of wisdom. And you notice this when, let's say, you have to put something together, or you have to fix something, and there are instructions. And on one hand, I'm old enough to remember before the internet, we had a piece of paper that came with it. And then, of course, when YouTube came around, that was way better, because there was way more information in the video than there was on the piece of paper, because the piece of paper was made usually by someone who knew the thing well, and so they didn't know what an ignorant person doesn't know. But on a video, you could tend to see it. And actually, in real life, wisdom is not so much describing a thing, because many of us can describe things with a fair degree of consistency and accuracy, but to actually do it, and that's where the retraining of Jordan Peterson on social media is going to be hilarious. Anyway, I enjoy too much. I'm a very happy person. So let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Did I talk too much? Probably. Did I not get to the point? Absolutely. Did I have rabbit trails where I made thumbnails in the video of my video and I had little sidebars where I went off over here and over there? Undoubtedly. But am I learning from my channel? I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't learn from it. And truth is, I learned from you all. And for me, when you ask the what is it, the mana question of this little corner, for me, the answer is, it is the learning channel. It is. We learn from each other. And those who have ears to learn, let them learn.